Welcome, everyone. I'm Wendy John, Head of Global Diversity and Inclusion at Fidelity Investments. Thank you for joining us this evening for a conversation about leveraging your power, influence, and currency to make transformative societal changes. Tonight, we'll introduce you to a new initiative, the new Commonwealth Racial Equity and Social Justice Fund, which was recently founded by 19 Black and Brown executives in Boston to help build the capacity of the Black and Brown-led community organizations who understand well the problem of racism in the Massachusetts area and are poised to effect real change. I'm thrilled to be joined by 4 of the founding members of the fund. First, Pamela Everhart, my esteemed colleague, who is the head of Regional Public Affairs and Community Relations at Fidelity Investments. Senator Mo Cowan, former U.S. Senator from Massachusetts, is President and Global Government Affairs and Policy and Developed Markets Leader for General Electric. Dr. Maisha Minter-Jordan is President and CEO of the DentaQuest Partnership for Oral Health Advancement and Catalyst Institute. And Quincy Miller is President and Vice Chairman of Eastern Bank. Thank you all for being here. As founding members of the new Commonwealth Fund, you came together in the wake of both the COVID-19 pandemic and recent spate of violence against Black people, most significantly the killing of George Floyd, to put energy and resources behind the racial awakening that's finally sweeping across our country. I'm pleased to moderate this discussion on the change you're hoping to drive in Massachusetts, your respective organizations, and beyond. So to kick it off, Mo, I wanted to ask you a little bit about how and why was the new Commonwealth Fund formed?
Thank you, Wendy. It's a pleasure to be here. And always a pleasure to be back with the CBC Foundation. You know, this effort was a culmination of a number of conversations that developed in the wake of the George Floyd killing. And as you noted, as we saw the consequences of the COVID pandemic and its impact on communities of color, particularly Black communities. Many of us, the 19, we've known each other for a long time, have worked together on a number of initiatives, community related and otherwise. And within the week of the Floyd killing, led by one of our colleagues who's not on the call today, Damian Wilmot, we began to convene to talk about how in this moment, we were all being called as individuals who are well positioned within significant corporate entities across the Commonwealth to bring our collective might together to try to create and present some solutions to the moment. And frankly, use our individual privilege and positions and our institutional power to really help Black and Brown communities, Black and Brown nonprofits, try to meet the moment, address the challenges, and lead to some sustainable change. So as you noted, there are 19 of us, and we created this fund, which is designed and with a goal of creating, developing a fund of $100 million over the next few years that will be targeted towards Black and Brown-led organizations, not-for-profit organizations, and 4 pillars, which we'll hear more about in a moment. And our goal is to meet this moment, but also to be part of a movement through these dollars, these acquisition and distribution of dollars, so that we can have lasting impact and promote change, positive change for the community.
Hey, Mo, I would also add that, you know, in terms of the 19, it was interesting that all of us are leaders, significant roles in these various organizations. And we were able to come together on this issue, all aligned. I don't recall anyone in any of those conversations challenging whether or not we should do it. From day one, when Damon brought us together, we were locked, you know, step on this, and we wanted to make a difference. So I think that's incredible. When you have 19 people, I think that's a lot to come together and, like I said, all singing from the same hymn book, realizing that this moment was important, and we could all do this together.
Pam, that's fantastic. I mean, honestly, I applaud all of you for your leadership and for really leaning into that moment. So Maisha, the fund was set up, I think Mo alluded to this, to initially support 4 areas in need of change. Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure, and as Pam said, it was interesting how all 19 of us aligned around these 4 areas. So it's economic empowerment, criminal and policing reform, youth education and civic engagement, and health disparities. And those 4 areas really at the top of our minds, in our hearts, things that we feel passionate about, or areas that we immediately coalesced around, and really excited to see how we can affect systemic change in each of those 4 areas, or we call them pillars.
Fantastic. What has been the community's response to the fund, Quincy?
Well, thanks, Wendy. Again, I echo everyone's comments. Happy to be here. And really, it's been remarkably well, especially given such a short time frame. We first came together, and really our first donations began to roll in early July, which was less than 8 weeks ago. And we've already generated over $22 million in confirmed pledges. This has, really been inspired by the remarkable generosity of our community, our corporations, and we obviously hope to continue this momentum to drive that ambitious goal of $100 million. But in reality, we literally just finalized our giving package a week ago as we roll an entire fund up and the administration, et cetera. And our marketing is just getting finalized in the coming days. So really, most of this has been on the word and the discussion and the belief of our companies that we really need to make change. You can imagine we've seen tremendous response from our Black and Brown communities, especially our Black and Brown nonprofit leaders who echo the challenges of securing funding. And not surprisingly, and surprisingly, not only, do you hear that from smaller nonprofits, but, I've heard that from white allies who work with other nonprofits led by people of color who've said to me, Quincy, I've seen it firsthand, that our executive director gets more questions. There's more due diligence that they have to provide to really receive funding. So the struggle's real. Mm-hmm. The community organizations from obviously the NAACP to the Urban League, our Black and Brown business coalitions have been standing alongside of us and with us in support. All the major business associations across Massachusetts have given us the venue to be able to speak with their members to make sure their companies can learn about this fund and what things that they need to do to step up. We've heard, as you can imagine, our government officials from our mayors across the Commonwealth to our governor and the cabinet have all recognized not only the significance of us as leaders of color coming together from a corporate perspective, but also the need for real change in their communities and have vowed to support the initiative. But really, I would say surpassing all of our expectations, we've received national coverage, calls, questions, from outside the Commonwealth.
Yeah, Wendy, I might add to that. Quincy's right. I mean, I think there's a there, if you will. Good news travels fast. And as he said, not only have we got a great response in Massachusetts, but we've heard from all across the country. And I've heard from people personally as far as Texas. I mean, there are a few mayors in Texas who are interested in this. We know that there are similar organizations formed, I think, in North Carolina. That's something going on in Colorado. So people realize, you know what, there's something there, and we want to be a part of it. So I'll just say, you know what, good news travels fast, and we're not mad about that. We're so happy to hear that this is catching on and others are interested.
I think the other key aspect, just to quickly tag on to some of Quincy's comments, is that all 19 of us also are giving. And so I think the fact that each of us are dedicating some of our own funds and donating those funds in support of this is not just that we're going back to our organizations and asking for their assistance, we're stepping up ourselves, which I think is key in leadership and showing that you're ready to put your money up to these important issues to try to affect change.
You all just really kind of coalesced around a theme for me, which is around leadership inspiring followership. So you all have, contributed. How do others sort of join in, Quincy? Can you tell us a little bit, how do you actually donate to the fund?
Yeah, great. Thanks, Wendy. Well, our first goal was to get this fund up quickly, and we had a great partner. So we partnered with the Boston Foundation here in Massachusetts to set up a donor advised fund. And so there's a fairly long but simple webpage, which is www.tbf.org/New Commonwealth Fund. But if you just Google new Commonwealth fund, it pops up as one of the top 3 choices. And so that's a very easy way to find it. So again, and a lot of that's been, the great press that we've been able to receive. So that's the easiest way to probably track it down and, look for ways to support.
Fantastic. And I love that you partnered with a community foundation. I think that just builds the right level of synergy. They're already familiar and aware of where there may be need. So Pam, maybe you could share a little bit more. What's the grant making process, right? So we've talked a lot about getting the money in. Now, as you start to accumulate those assets, what's the process for determining which organizations will qualify for support?
Well, Wendy, it's still early. I mean, we just started this in June. But given all the progress, it's hard to believe that there was only a couple of months ago. But this is our plan right now. In mid to late October, we plan to announce a portfolio of what we call demonstration grants. And these initial awards are all unsolicited, right? But it will reflect a learning opportunity and a response to the urgency of now. And in terms of developing our grant making practice, we really want to be very deliberate and thoughtful and engage a number of stakeholders. So we'll look to the community to help us develop a process that will be responsive and I'll say user-friendly in terms of the grant-making application and the reporting out. We hope to then have a broader, fuller rollout in early 2021. But as I say, it's still early. We're trying to work out all the kinks and get everything going, but we want to actually work pretty quickly to show people that we are intentional about making change.
Yeah, I would just say that was one of the key tenets that we had when we first got together in the first meeting. We decided this idea. The decision was it wasn't going to be us 19 sitting there making the decision on where all these funds needed to go. This was always about Black and brown leaders connecting and being close to the Black and brown community and understanding from community leaders, from the people in the community, who are the organizations that need the change but just need some support to scale and investment in them. And so that for us, that takes time, right? That takes listening and having conversations versus just, sending money out there in the community.
And if I may, I think embedded in that, Wendy, in the audience is one of the joys of this exercise, this effort is we are going to gain exposure to some wonderful organizations doing important work that may not always get the attention that some of the larger organizations that our companies or our foundations are familiar with. But hopefully one of the lasting legacies of this work, we will help amplify those good works, those organizations through this effort, help put them on some other radar screens and help them grow in the way that we believe they can and should so that they can do more work in more of the communities. And if we're successful in that regard alone, this will be a significant and positive effort.
Yes, and just to add to that, sorry, please, Pam.
I was just going to say the majority of us, of the 19, are Boston-based, but there are a few who are outside Boston. So when we think about the Commonwealth, there are parts of the state where they never would have gotten exposure. And that's another thing that we think is so important, particularly the western part of Massachusetts as well. And we want to to offer lifeblood and a lifeline to those as well. So we want to be very conscious about not concentrating just in Boston, but to actually deliver resources across the entire Commonwealth.
Right, and I wanted to add that we also have engaged an executive consultant who's working with us, who's formerly of a community foundation, of a family foundation as well, who is bringing her grant expertise to helping us to create the process for grant making and helping us to create the stakeholder meetings and to engage the community, doing the analysis of the different areas across the state where there are Black and Brown communities who have not gotten the not-for-profit dollars or the philanthropic dollars that they deserve. So that's another way in which we've put this together, and we're putting it together in addition to tapping into the expertise of the Boston Foundation. And I think as other groups are trying to do similar actions, it's helpful for them to understand that we're bringing the passion, the energy, our own personal funds and the funds of our organizations, and doing a lot, most of the lifting in terms of fundraising, but also engaging in expertise is really helpful to help really create the pathway forward in terms of our grant making.
Fantastic. I think you all did an excellent job, just educating all of us on the background around the process to create the fund and the infrastructure and support, right? And I heard Pam mention intention, and I also heard some themes around, really trying to change the way that support maybe has happened in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. So let's talk a little bit about that change. Having spent some time myself in the nonprofit world, we understand that there can be disparities in terms of, who gets funded. And so one of the goals of the fund is to build capacity for Black and Brown-led community organizations in the Commonwealth. Can you share with us any data that maybe you were enlightened or exposed to that really brings light to the disparity in funding that Black and Brown-led organizations or those that are doing work in those communities don't get the same funding as other organizations?
Sure, I'm happy to answer that. As you look at the unrestricted net assets of Black-led organizations, they're 76% smaller than their white-led counterparts. And as you think about the impact of that, funding is often a proxy of trust. And so if an organization is underfunded or doesn't have the same assets, then they're less likely to get the trust of a philanthropic organization. They think that that organization is not able to take on a grant of any size, and often will overlook them in terms of that funding. So part of what we're trying to do, and Mo described this earlier, is identify those organizations that haven't traditionally been part of the network of organizations that receive funding from our philanthropic organizations within Massachusetts, and lift up those leaders, give them the capacity to take on larger grants, understand what their needs are, and connect them to other resources within the Commonwealth that can help further their advancement. But I think looking at those types of statistics that I would say are not unique to Massachusetts and are nationwide is something that we felt was really important as we made the decisions around who we're going to give our dollars to and how we're going to invest in our community.
And I think also, Maisha, I would add to that I guess we're still in the throes of COVID. I think we have to do even more, right? Mm-hmm. Because we know that these organizations were already disadvantaged. They're even more disadvantaged as we go through COVID, and just the resources they had themselves already within their own organizations, for many probably have dropped, right? And so they are really working on shoestrings. So the timing for this new Commonwealth Fund, I mean, I think what is the silver lining of COVID? Maybe this may be it, right? We have this opportunity to build additional capacity and help for these organizations.
Exactly.
So Mo, maybe I'll ask you a little bit. This is a different way of doing philanthropy. Do you have some thoughts about how the current system might need to change in order to address racism? Because some of the timing of this was around the elevation and escalation, around racial equity and social justice disparities, right? So tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I mean, look, you start with where the lessons Maisha taught us just a few moments ago, the disparities in how Black and Brown-led organizations are funded, or the restrictions placed on those fundings is stark, right? The numbers, and we won't get into them all in this call, are fundamentally shocking. That we recognize, I think everybody on this call and who's listening knows that we don't have a shortage of resources that can be put to good use. What we want to do and what we recognize there's a need for is to connect those resources, starting with companies and organizations, to these organizations that heretofore may not have been, as I said earlier, on the radar screen, right? Mm-hmm. We want to through our good deeds and our good efforts, try to challenge this notion that if I've never heard of you before, or your organization isn't of sufficient size, I don't know that it's worth investing in the cause. One of the things we're most interested in is working with people who are closest to the need, who are in the community. Those aren't always the biggest organizations, right? And as I said in the earlier discussion, if we are successful here, we will have created a pathway, a juncture for those organizations to get tighter connectivity to corporate interests, corporate foundations, public dollars, and otherwise. And that's fundamentally needed right now, because the people who are closest to the work, who understand the work, who understand where the work is needed, unfortunately, it tends to be a lot of organizations that may not be as close to the funding resources. Our challenge, our opportunity, is to bridge that gap, and that's at the root, and it's sort of threaded throughout these efforts.
Right, I'm excited about the opportunity to Mo's point, to lift up these leaders as we think about how we're communicating and getting our media out, to be able to feature some of these leaders in the work that they're doing and the impacts that they have on the community is something that we're all incredibly excited about as we think about, it's not just about us, it's about the community and lifting up those within the community who don't often get that spotlight. So this is one of the things that I think we're all, incredibly excited about, lifting up those leaders.
And I think just to wrap this point, when you're lifting up those leaders in those organizations, what our hope is it allows us to do is something that also doesn't happen a lot in philanthropy, which is there's a great idea or a great nonprofit happening in this community, but it's happening in just that community, right? And they haven't had the investment to scale and go to another Black and brown community that have that same type of impact. So when you lift that leader up, they get that exposure, they have that support. Now they can take that mission to other places and deliver those best demonstrated practices of really breaking down the systemic barriers to equality in our communities.
Exactly.
So I've heard a few things. I've heard identifying and elevating, some organizations that maybe don't get as much of the visibility and the leaders of those organizations that are doing great work in the broader, Massachusetts community. I've heard, just also getting them the resourcing and building that sort of awareness. Are there other success measures, Quincy, that we all are in organizations where we measure and we have measurements and KPIs and metrics that we're managed to? So it's early days, but are there other measures of success?
Again, I think, that was key of one of them, but there's really two. Obviously, one is developing more funds for frontline Black and brown led nonprofit organizations. That's key to our mission. But another is inspiring others to action, especially leaders of color in the corporate sector, other professional leaders. Again, we talked about this community engagement, but it's also about engaging other professionals of color, bringing them into the tent. They have the same passion and mission, and that's another key driver of one of the things that we're looking to do and the benchmark that we're going to measure ourselves against as we look at our success. It's like the call to action from grassroots leaders of color in the recent Chronicle of Philanthropy article, which was "Fund Us Like You Want Us to Win." We believe that the new Commonwealth Fund will serve as a model throughout the nation for funds seeking to improve the racial climate and leverage the corporate and nonprofit playing field and make sure that it's level for people of color.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, I'm inspired already. So a question. It occurs to me, we're all, we've all been part of some sort of corporation or in a leadership position trying to drive change in some way. Tell me a little bit, and maybe Pam, you could kick this off, about, in addition to philanthropy, are there other best practices that you've picked up from your work at Fidelity or elsewhere about engaging with the community that you probably will apply in how New Commonwealth goes about, really making change?
Sure, Wendy. There are lots of ways that companies can participate and help the community. I'd say money is one thing, but think about what we're doing, the new Commonwealth, providing our time and our talent. And companies can do that by leveraging their employees. And many companies have these, employee resource groups, ERGs. And look to them, look to those associates to volunteer. My team at Fidelity started something called Fidelity Cares. And our associates actively, volunteer and share their many talents in terms of helping smaller nonprofit organizations. At many of our large company events, and Wendy, you know this, you used to be in the business, we would have some sort of service component where even your clients want to get involved in making change. We are doing things where we're partnering with schools. In this midst of COVID, what we realized is that there are a lot of Black and brown kids in underserved communities who were not logging in. In Boston, I believe the stat was 1 in 5 students didn't even log on, right after we went in a shutdown mode. And so companies should think about, well, what can we do to help out there? It's not necessarily money, but do you have computers you could offer? Could you help them get access to the web? And what about teachers? I mean, one thing we thought about is, as companies and corporate folks, we were using Zoom, we've been doing that for a while now. But for many of these teachers, that was new, right? And so what we did was went into some of the schools and actually gave them, tips and best practices around just doing a Zoom call and helping to get people engaged. We also figured out that we have to do things virtually. Before, we did a lot of in-person volunteerism. So we had to pivot very quickly and try to think about, well, what could we do from our homes? And one interesting thing that came up in our office in Texas is that we decided that we wanted to make sure that the schools would continue to be beautiful once September started. And we actually teamed up with a large organization who provided lumber, and we sent materials to the homes of our associates, and they built benches for the schools, and then they dropped them off. So there are lots of different ways that one can use their talent of their employees. The other thing that companies can do easily, and I'm sure Quincy would echo this because Eastern Bank has been phenomenal in this, and that's in engaging diverse suppliers. Fidelity, we spent, I think, about $140 million last year with diverse suppliers, but we can actually do a lot more and be intentional and have a strategy around that. So I think large companies, like I said, that's low-hanging fruit. You can look in all of your communities and see, are there other suppliers that we hadn't initially focused on who could benefit from, partnering up with a large company. So those are just some of the few things that I think companies can do, and I'm sure others can talk about things that their companies are working on.
Yeah,
I just have to echo that supplier diversity piece from Pam. As you listen to the conversations that we had about Black and brown led nonprofits, it's the exact same conversation with Black and brown small businesses. Less resources from a supplier diversity. Do you trust them? You don't know them. And so that, the efforts that we're talking about with the nonprofits, we have to take the same efforts in supporting our Black and brown small businesses.
Absolutely. And I know this isn't happening on a Sunday, but Pam, I love the reference, right, to time, talent, and treasure. That's just, we should all be thinking about that and how we can, leverage it. Maybe not all at the same time, but certainly where can we fill a void? So
I'd say, when I talked about talent again, it's just thinking about the skill set that might be lacking in some of these small organizations. So for instance, do they have a marketing department? Probably not. We can help with that. How many finance people do they have? Budgeting for a lot of nonprofits is difficult. That's another expertise that people could offer. And then just coming up with a strategy for their organization and how they want to move forward. And we deal with this every day. It's second nature to us in terms of strategy. So those are other ways that companies can think about offering offering their time and talent to nonprofits.
Fantastic. So as we talk about that, we talk about talent, talking about time, and we kind of started to draw some alignment to not only the work that you're doing in the community, but all of the organizations that we sit in. I now spend my full day, and I mean my full day, focused on advancing diversity and inclusion at Fidelity Investments. And you know, we're very focused on accelerating the change. It does feel like somebody put their foot on the pedal somewhere in the universe. I'm just curious about what you've seen already be very successful, whether in your own organizations or elsewhere, that's helping to accelerate efforts and really strategies around diversity and inclusion that are making the greatest impact. Quincy, do you want to start us off?
Sure. Yeah, I'd be happy to do that. And you know, there's a lot of great tactics, I'm sure, but you know, I'll just sort of highlight three. You know, first of all, you know, within a corporation, I think one of the probably the most important thing is leadership. It starts at the top, and it starts with a true and, more importantly, authentic commitment. You know, too often in my generation, you know, we've heard the talk, the placating, but then seen very little action. But true companies at the top of the house not only talk about the value of diversity and inclusion, but they live it. It starts with their board, and at their board level. Your board should reflect the community and the customers that you serve. There's no excuses about finding the right talent. The talent is all around us. It's just simply about being intentional and being committed to it. And you have to, as a leader, particularly in the C-suite, have that pit in your stomach that you're not doing enough. I think that's one of the key drivers. You know, the second is culture. You know, do you advocate as a company? What's the culture that you've created within your four walls and outside of them, both by your actions and your values? You know, it's more than just D&I training, implicit bias training, et cetera, which are all very important and great things. But it doesn't just end there, right? It's about embracing the belief that it's not only the right thing to do in terms of having a diverse workforce, but it's a smart thing to do because it makes you a better company. And more, our clients are demanding of it. So it really is the smart thing to do from not only a shareholder's perspective, but from a stakeholder's perspective. And I think, you know, the final sort of third piece of that is really purposeful effort. You know, I work in an industry throughout my entire career of financial services that is not very diverse beyond the front line. And it's something we've been working on, you know, for, you know, the 24 years I've been here. But, you know, those are excuses about being able to find talent. Often it's simply because you're not looking in the right place. Working with community organizations focused on Black and brown talent, business associations for professionals of color, colleges and universities from HBCUs to Ivies who have networks of talented, diverse individuals. And you can't just focus on hiring, which is an important part of the culture. It absolutely is, but you have to make sure that, you know, your company is supportive and that you root out your own biases. You know, it simply takes a stroke of a pen to make sure that all the women and people of color in your company are paid fairly, with their male counterparts, right? It's a simple human resources exercise. Like, that's the type of culture that you have to create to really be committed to it from a corporation standpoint.
Thank you, Quincy. You certainly gave us, you know, some things to think about. You know, one of the things that I really resonated with me is as you talked about intention informing our actions and the importance of the customer and the customer impact. So Pam, maybe you could share, are there ways business can achieve a multiplier effect by spreading change to the customer?
Yes, Wendy, I'll say, just, you know, thinking about Fidelity, what, 76 years old or something. we look so different now. Our customers look so different now than they did 76 years ago, right? And so we have right now a really diverse group of people who could benefit from using our products and services. And so I think going back to what Quincy said about culture and about having a diverse workforce, then what we need to do is then create an experience for our customers that value that diversity, right? And make them feel welcome in coming. And this is the way that for us, to improve their financial lives. We're certainly committed to that. We are committed to diversity with, naming you, Wendy, as our new head of D&I, and to think about how we can really improve the financial outcomes for people of color. And we're lucky that we can probably leverage our clients to think about that as well, and to get them to model some of the behavior that we're doing to be more reflective of our customer base. I'd also say we can start when people are young. As I said, I run community relations, and we're starting as early as possible with schools and teaching financial education to students so that they feel comfortable about talking about financial concepts and will feel confident about it as they become potential customers for us. So it's really trying to change our business practices so that the diverse communities in which we serve can feel comfortable walking into Fidelity and feeling like they are a part of the larger community.
Absolutely. So to your point, Pam, in my prior life at Fidelity, I managed client relationships and certainly had very diverse customers that I interacted with. And they were, and their employees, since I was on the institutional side, really mirrored, right? They were out there in the public domain. So it's important that we match our products, our services, to meet that customer base, and that we continue to evolve them with them in mind, right? So we believe at Fidelity, and Quincy kind of echoed this about, it starts at the top with the leadership. And we are really look at diversity and inclusion as a change effort, and change requires accountability. And perhaps I'm comforted by the fact that for me, it's not just about Wendy driving the change. We believe that everyone has a part to play in leading diversity and inclusion efforts and participating. And so Mo, I'm really curious to get your perspective about what are some of the best ways for ensuring that everyone is part of the solution? You're Mr. Engagement in my mind. So tell us a little bit about how we continue to make sure that we bring everyone along.
Yeah, look, Wendy, I think you might have said this earlier in this discussion, like if you don't measure it, right? Well, as you said, we all have KPIs and metrics that matter in our business. And the bottom line is if you don't measure it, it doesn't matter. That's just fact. And, our organization is on its own journey, and we're starting to do a lot better job of measuring. And I think one of the first things leadership can do, right? Talking about the top of the ticket, is create an environment, make very clear that this matters. And you're going to start by doing an honest assessment of where you are today, right? And sharing with your colleagues, your team, about how well you are performing. And it's not just about numbers, right? Numbers matter, but where are those people in your organization? Are they in senior positions of influence? And if not, why not, right? And then share those numbers internally, and if you're courageous enough, even externally, to be held accountable. When you're doing strategic reviews with your portfolio businesses and those P&L leaders, are you asking them, are you challenging them about the makeup of their senior leadership teams and making that one of the metrics that they're judged about and that they're compensated on, frankly? When you think about the board and when opportunities present themselves, or whether you want to create new opportunities for board members, are you bringing to that discussion and decision a mindset and a commitment to make sure you're going to have a representative pool of candidates who reflect, in our case, right? We're a global company. We're in 180 countries around the world, right? So a representation matters to us. I think one thing when it comes to accountability that the employees look for, certainly in my colleagues, you know, they're happy that we want to support efforts like this and others that have external focus, because that's critical. But people also say, okay, well, what's happening in our house, right? Let's mind our own affairs too, right? And our leadership is rightfully both being challenged and responding to that, right? And we, you know, our CEO named the Chief Diversity Officer. Candidly, we'd had one for many years and we'd gone for a few years without one. He named a new Chief Diversity Officer and put the CDO on his senior team, right? Reports only to him. And this person will sit in all the business review strategy sessions and will bring that perspective to those conversations, right? And some of the best ideas around accountability for us, Wendy, are coming from my colleagues across the company. And they're coming from across the company because management recognizes we actually, you know what, listening to our people, asking about their experiences and asking them to be brutally honest with us about where we have not met the moment, where we have not lived up to our values, is how those ideas surface. And leadership, right, must also be held accountable. And the way that works is if we don't deliver, if we don't meet that moment, the best of our talent, diverse and otherwise, will walk, right? And we'll have no one to blame but ourselves. So the opportunity is in front of leadership to meet this moment, not only through supporting efforts like what we're talking about today with the new Commonwealth Fund, right? Which is critically important because these organizations need the resources that we can bring to bear. But we've got to mind the store, our own store too, take care of our own family, take care of our own house. And you need leaders who are willing to have those uncomfortable conversations and willing to be challenged by folks all up and down the pipeline about how well we're doing. And hold people leaders, as we call them in our company, accountable for failing to meet our expectations when it comes to recruiting, retaining, developing, advancing, promoting, and supporting diverse talent in the places that matter.
Fantastic. Well, Mo, I think you gave us a blueprint about how to get everyone involved. So if I attempt to be a bit of the skeptic, many people ask me, Wendy, is this just a moment? Do you think the momentum will last? Do we have the stomach for this level of change? So Maisha, maybe I throw that question to you. It's probably a little bit unfair, but you know, you can start this conversation going. How do we keep momentum going?
You know, I think part of the way that I think about my own momentum and how I keep it going is my level of engagement, right? Every day we turn on the news and we see another affront to social justice, racial justice. We cannot afford to turn the other way. We cannot afford to only simply think about our own position and keeping ourselves in these incredible positions of power. We are at this point where it is so blatant and in our face, whether or not that's through social media or on the news, that as leaders, as corporate leaders, as not-for-profit leaders, we can't look away. And I think that's the way that I stay engaged, is by staying informed and staying educated on these issues, understanding the statistics, the disparities that we face as communities of color. And we have to take that as our responsibility. We have moved over time into this place of the individual. And I think COVID-19 and the social justice movement that we're currently experiencing really highlights the fact that we are a community of people. And we cannot only think about ourselves. If I don't wear a mask, I risk someone else getting infected with COVID-19, or vice versa. There's such a connectedness amongst us as people that we can no longer ignore. And even one of the things that I was heartened by as we look at some of the protests, that they're diverse, that allies are stepping up. And so this is a moment that needs to be sustained. And the work that we're doing as a new Commonwealth Fund has that intention. Not to just give a grant and to walk away, but to understand, how do we have a lasting impact on these organizations? How do we bring them the resources so that they can be self-sustaining into the future? How do we introduce them and bring them under the tent into this broader network of philanthropy? Those are the types of initiatives that we as leaders cannot walk away from. We have an individual responsibility to a collective empowerment of our community. And if we don't take that, then the generations to come are going to be in the exact same place that we've been in. And where I'm at this place now, and I think many of us have talked about this as leaders and as people of color in the business community, that there's a naked truth in front of us. And we're having much more authentic conversations with our white counterparts than we've ever had. And they're willing to listen, and we're willing to tell them exactly how we feel. And I'm using every opportunity that I have, whether or not that's in a boardroom, as the president and CEO of my organization, to bring that truth forward. And I think as long as we continue to do that, this won't just be a moment, it'll be a movement. And I don't think that I can ever walk back from that. I don't think I could ever go back to staying silent on the issues, to not talking about my experience as a Black woman and feeling as if I have to shoulder that and keep pushing on because I'm lucky to be in this corporate environment. I'm here because I'm supposed to be here, and my story is just as valid, it's just as important as anyone else's story. And that's what makes the fabric of a good, strong company, being able to bring that diversity to the forefront and not shy away from it. And I think for all of those reasons, we're at a place where we can't walk back and we can't look back or turn back and be different in terms of our engagement and in terms of our passion on these social justice issues.
And if I may, Wendy, and that's a great answer, Maisha, and I echo all that 150%. I would just, for me, right, it's a great question because that is a risk, right? How does the moment become just that? Moments pass, summer's over, people get busy with other things, but guess what, right? Black and brown folks are still struggling. Issues around policing remain. All you need to do is turn on your TV or follow your social feed. I wrote a piece over the summer and I asked that question. I was like, when it was Boston specific, but when people go to Cape Cod or the Vineyard and the Red Sox are playing and now it's football season, everybody gets to focus on something else, or we're going to lose focus on this issue. And to Maisha's point, all of us in the fight, whatever way you want to participate in the fight, we got to keep the fight alive. And it may sound trite to say we have to use our voices, but I think the burden, and it's a righteous burden for those of us in these positions, we have to keep using our voices and push forward. And yes, make people continue to have uncomfortable conversations about serious things, because these inequities aren't going to be addressed or resolved overnight. We're talking about 400 plus years of stuff, right? I'm not going to be here 400 years from now, but I think the commitment of the 19 of us and those who are going to partner with us is we're going to use the remaining years we've got to keep spreading this gospel and doing what we can to try to address these problems through this fund and otherwise. And I certainly, my allies, Black, white, or otherwise, know that, as the old saying goes, you're not going to get this toothpaste back in the tube, right? We're going to keep talking about this. And if we're going to keep talking about it till we're all comfortable having these uncomfortable conversations, and we recognize that it's only together that we're going to address these problems. So yes, fall is coming, winter will be here soon. Hopefully we'll have a vaccine. Guess what? Racism will still be here. Systemic injustices will be here. Structural injustices will still be here. So we got to keep fighting, and we got to keep pushing, and we got to make everybody fight with us.
Yeah, I would just echo, and we're seeing some of this change in behavior, right? In the terms of keeping it going. Another pillar that we talked about, because we were worried about that, right? Not letting this just be a moment, was we were going to ask corporations for something they haven't done for decades now. We were going to ask corporations for multi-year gifts, a commitment over the long term. We would have been very intentional that, now, as I've often said, look, if you want to just give us $1 million, we'll take it because we can put it to good work. But I'd rather you take that $1 million, split it into 4 years and give us $250,000 a year so that we can stay engaged with you and you can see the impact that your investment is having in these communities over the long term, so that this isn't a one-time thing and a one-time check. And we're seeing companies stand up and do that in this moment that they have not done in a really long time.
Wendy, I know we're just about at time, but I agree with everything everyone has said. I'll just end my part by saying, and quoting the late John Lewis, if need be, we have to get in some good trouble. And I think we stand ready to do it.
Well, I just want to thank you all. I also want to thank the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation for providing us with this forum to share and spotlight just the really great example that you have set in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts for how the power of collective effort. As we close, I want you to think about the fact that because this year's annual leadership conference is virtual, we might be reaching with and engaging with a really broad audience, including some young students and other demographics that might not normally be able to attend this conference, and maybe thinking, wow, I want to do something similar where I am. We have a concept at Fidelity around simple starts, small changes that you can make, behavioral usually, that will have a real tangible impact to influence and accelerate diversity and inclusion. I'm curious, we'll do it quick round robin style. If you're sitting at home watching this right now, wondering, I might not be able to do what they have done, but how do I make a change in the community in which I live and breathe? How do I use my time, talent, and treasure to be a part of this movement?
I'm happy to just quickly say, stay educated, understand the facts, understand the data, and spread the word.
I'd say don't stand on the sidelines, jump in the deep end.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Your voice has never been more powerful than it is now, and that's what's going to drive this movement.
Mm-hmm.
And I would end by simply saying, do what we did. Call a few friends. You would be amazed at what you're able to do when you put your thoughts together, your energy together. In our case, we've created a fund we think will be a lasting legacy for change in the Commonwealth.
Fantastic. Last opportunity to remind everyone, where do they find out more information about the new Commonwealth Fund?
www.tbf.org/New Commonwealth Fund, or just Google New Commonwealth Fund.
Fantastic. Well, I've enjoyed this conversation. Many wouldn't know this, but I lived in Boston for over 12 years. It's people say if you can make it in New York, you can make it anywhere. I challenge that. You make it in Boston, you can make it anywhere. So I applaud you all for this phenomenal effort, for giving us, a blueprint on how to move forward. And I just encourage you to keep doing the good work that you're doing. And as Pam said, keep getting into good trouble. Thank you and have a wonderful night.